Welcome back to Face the Nation. For more on the terror attacks in Paris, we go now to Devin Nunes, who chairs the House Intelligence Committee. He is in Tulare, California, and Senate Intelligence Chairman Richard Burr, who is in Greensboro, North Carolina. Chairman Burr, I want to start with you. What does this attack tell you about the shape of the ISIS organization now?
Well, John, it just confirmed what Devin and I have said for the last year, that there are more threats, threads of threats across not only this country, but globally, and that we always saw Europe as probably the most advantageous target. And in the last 48 hours, we've seen that become reality in Paris in a huge, horrific way.
Chairman Nunes, what do you make? France, since the Charlie Hebdo attacks, has increased its intelligence, has been on the watch, and yet this was able to be a sophisticated coordination under French authorities' noses. What does that make you think about U.S. intelligence and the ability to stop these kinds of attacks in the U.S.?
Well, I think you have a couple things. First off, you have a strategic failure on behalf of the administration on not having a real plan to fight ISIS. Secondly, I really think we should take to heart what FBI Director Comey has been saying over and over again, and that is that we are losing the capability to track these terrorists around the globe.
Chairman Burr, what about that capability? How can you improve it? What would you do to try to fix this question of encryption and the ability of these terrorists to communicate with each other without being watched?
Well, John, technology is going to be a tough thing to deal with, but we've got to redouble our efforts to make sure that we're able to get the communications we need to give us lead time, to give us a better understanding. But I think Devin hit on the key. We've got to have a strategy. We don't have a strategy in Syria as it relates to ISIL. The president talked the other morning about ISIL was contained. America learned within 24 hours it's not contained. It's rampant everywhere in the world that they intend to carry out these horrific acts. It just so happens the United States is a target, but Paris was easier. And if we don't get a strategy, tactics don't make a strategy. So these pinpricks that we've had as far as the tactical effort in Syria really is not a strategy. We've got to have a strategy, and hopefully, President Hollande will call 5 of NATO in, and maybe we'll put together a coalition that can, for once, attack this horrific terrorist element before they have the ability to carry out another coordinated attack like this.
Chairman Nunes, let's talk about that strategy. If you were to create one and author one, it would presumably have a piece that deals with Syria and Iraq, but then also an intelligence piece for protecting America. What would that strategy look like for you?
Well, I think more than that, John. The point that I've made all along about ISIS is that the president has tried to talk about and developed a containment strategy for Iraq and Syria, when ISIS is stretched from Morocco to the Afghanistan-Pakistan region. So we just saw just a couple weeks ago what appears to be an ISIS attack on a Russian jetliner coming out of Egypt. We continue to, a lot of people talk about the migration of fighters flowing out of Iraq and Syria into Europe, but what they forget is there's many people, migrants coming out of North Africa. So you can't fight ISIS unless you are willing to put a strategy together that deals with North Africa, the failure in Libya, the problems in the Sinai, Iraq and Syria, and the Afghanistan-Pakistan region. And then, and I think more complicated, is what are the Europeans going to do now that it appears like ISIS has rooted themselves into Europe with a command and control structure?
Chairman Burr, you mentioned NATO in Article 5. What should the United States be prepared to do to join with France or to take up this army? And what should Americans be ready for if this is a new phase in an attempt to defeat ISIS?
Well, John, I would tell you today the American people want to eliminate this threat. So we should be prepared to bring whatever to the table, that coalition of NATO partners, and hopefully that would be joined with Gulf state partners. It may be joined with Russia, individuals that see ISIS as a real threat, not just in the region but globally. And I would hope that, like we've sent investigators from the FBI, and we will send others to Paris to help out, I hope we'll make a commitment to President Hollande that we're 100% beside them not behind them, beside them, and we're willing to lead.
But Americans may want to eliminate this threat, and being willing to lead, Chairman Burr, is important, but I mean, what does that really mean in practical terms? I mean, are we talking about more special operations? Are we talking about operating in lots of different theaters? Give us some concrete examples that people can balance their desire to get rid of ISIS with their weariness about extended engagements of the U.S. military.
Well, John, I'm not in the business of military strategy. I'll leave that up to DOD. But we've got to have individuals on the ground that are collecting intelligence. We've got to have better intelligence about targets. We've got to make sure that we carry the fight to ISIL, which means probably more special operations efforts in that region. You can't do this with 3,500 Americans in an advisory role. 50 special forces, which we've just upped in the last 2 weeks, that's not enough to make a big impact. But mirror that with a global effort, and we can take this fight to a very difficult and barbaric terrorist organization.
Chairman Nunes, in the last 45 seconds we've got here, I'd like your assessment of what the United States should do about Syrian refugees coming into the United States, how to screen them, and what your view is about that.
There's no possible way to screen them. It should be stopped immediately. Look, we feel for these refugees, but the bottom line, if you don't want refugees, then you have to go into Iraq and Syria and defeat ISIS. And, the challenge is, people talk a lot about boots on the ground. Look, we've had boots on the ground there for over a year. The problem is, as Chairman Burr said, trying to use pinpricks for airstrikes and, having, the first rule of war for the Obama administration is not to take collateral damage. Well, that's not war. And if that's what you're going to, if you're going to strap down the United States Air Force and our allies with these types of rules of engagement, we are never going to win, and you're going to see more and more refugees flood into Europe.
All right. Congressman, Senator, thank you. We'll be right back.